The alert appeared in the corner of his cell phone just seconds before Michael Reynolds turned off his computer in the silent office. The screen illuminated his tired face with a notification that had become commonplace in that house, but which never failed to cause a strange tightness in his chest. Motion-detected living room. In that millionaire mansion, built to appear perfect on the outside, the cameras weren't there for luxury or paranoia. They existed because something had gone out of control a long time ago, even if no one dared to say it aloud. Michael Reynolds wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. His fortune was the result of a relentless climb, which began in a small law firm where he learned that emotion was the greatest enemy of profit. The obsession with control wasn't a personality trait, but armor forged through years of risk and success. For him, chaos was synonymous with bankruptcy. And order was the only guarantee that the castle he had built wouldn't crumble. Moments before the camera alert, he reviewed a multi-million-dollar contract. Feeling the familiar wave of power and exhaustion, he looked at Emily's photo on the table, a perfectly posed image, and felt a brief emptiness. The house was too big, too quiet. But he quickly pushed the thought away. Everything under control. He murmured to himself, a mantra he used to stifle any doubt. The cameras were merely an extension of this philosophy. If he could monitor every variable, he could guarantee the outcome. He wasn't watching his daughter, he was managing her upbringing. Michael remained seated for a few seconds, staring intently at the notice, as if he were about to discover something he had been avoiding for years. The silence of the house was as organized as the contracts he signed daily, and yet it seemed to carry an invisible weight. Everything worked, everything was in its place, but something essential didn't fit. The cameras captured movement, but couldn't record what truly mattered within those walls. The Reynolds family was known for its success, discipline, and impeccable image. From the outside, the house represented stability, control, and victory. Inside, however, there was a kind of silence that didn't appear in photos or reports, a silence learned, repeated, and reinforced every day, especially by those who were not yet old enough to understand its price. If you've made it this far, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. These stories aren't just about rich families or luxurious homes. They're about what happens when a child learns too early that love isn't guaranteed, but a reward that needs to be earned. The Reynolds family had built their fortune in the high-end real estate market, transforming vacant lots into multi-million-dollar developments that graced the covers of magazines and business websites. Michael, at 45, was known for his strategic coolness and ability to anticipate risks before they arose. Victoria, at 42, a corporate lawyer, deeply believed that order and discipline were the foundation of any successful life. For them, control always meant protection. Victoria, for her part, carried the weight of a lineage. She grew up hearing that a Reynolds doesn't make mistakes. Her childhood was a rigorous schedule of piano lessons, languages, and etiquette, where each achievement was merely a stepping stone to the next requirement. Her parents' love was conditional approval, a reward for excellence. Upon marrying Michael, she found a partner who shared the same belief in discipline. Emily was living proof of her success as a mother, a child who didn't cause trouble, who understood her place. The mansion atop the hill perfectly reflected this mentality. Spacious rooms, light-colored furniture, minimalist decor, and an almost clinical organization. Nothing stayed out of place for long, not even emotions. Loud laughter was rare, children's running around was non-existent, and any sign of disorder was quickly corrected with silent glances or discreet instructions. It was a functional, efficient, and impeccable house. In the midst of that scene lived Emily, a 6-year-old girl who moved through the house as if trying not to disturb anyone. Her steps were too soft for a child, and her voice was almost never higher than a whisper. Before speaking, she observed. Before asking for something, she thought. Often, she gave up before even trying. Emily seemed to understand rules that had never been explained in words. She had learned very early on that the house functioned best when she didn't make mistakes, when she didn't cry, when she didn't need attention. Being praised meant being on the right track, and any failure, however small, seemed to put her at risk of losing something she couldn't name but felt deeply. After 3 caregivers resigned within a few months, Michael made a practical decision, consistent with everything he believed in. He installed a complete surveillance system throughout the house, discrete cameras in the living room, hallways, kitchen, and common areas. Not to monitor strangers, but to observe his own daughter and identify what, in his view, needed to be corrected. He believed that by carefully analyzing the behavior, he would find the problem. What Michael didn't realize was that the cameras were only recording the result of something much deeper, silent and emotionally devastating, something no monitoring system could measure. When Sophia arrived at the house, at 22 years old, carrying a simple suitcase and a soft Portuguese accent, the routine was already perfectly established. Michael greeted her politely, almost professionally, as he did with business partners. Victoria presented schedules, rules, and expectations with the clarity of someone who believes that everything can be organized if it is well explained from the beginning. Nothing was said with hostility, but everything carried an implicit weight. Victoria commented that Emily was an extremely well-behaved child who liked routines and needed predictability. She said this with a slight smile, as if describing a rare quality. Sophia listened attentively, without interrupting, without promising quick results or solutions. She simply nodded, showing respect, but maintaining a curiously observant posture. Emily appeared a few minutes later, standing in the doorway of the room, holding a book against her chest like a shield. She didn't look directly at Sophia, nor did she approach. She stood there, waiting for some command, some sign that she was allowed to be in that space. The silence between the two was long, but not uncomfortable for Sophia. "You can continue what you were doing," Sophia said, her voice low and calm, breaking the tension without imposing anything. Emily hesitated, as if that sentence were a difficult test to interpret. After a few seconds, she walked slowly to the sofa and sat down, still without opening the book. Her eyes remained alert, as if expecting a correction at any moment. Sophia realized something immediately. That child didn't need extra stimulation or constant commands. She needed something much more basic and rare in that house: permission to exist without fear of making mistakes. One Saturday afternoon, Sophia broke the unspoken rule of the house. Instead of using the crayons neatly arranged in the box, she brought out gouache paint and cardboard. Emily watched, tense, the impending mess. When Sophia purposefully dropped some blue paint on the marble floor, Emily let out a small cry of panic, immediately looking for the door, expecting punishment. Sophia just laughed, grabbed a cloth, and wiped it up slowly. "Without drama, the paint comes off. Emily, what matters is what you're creating," she said. Emily hesitated, but the explicit permission to make a mistake freed her. She began to paint with a restrained ferocity, mixing colors chaotically and joyfully. Later, while washing their dirty hands, Emily asked, "Why don't you get angry when I make a mistake?" Sophia looked her in the eyes. "Making mistakes is just a way of discovering what works. You don't need to be good to be loved, Emily. You just need to be you." In the first few days, Sophia spent most of her time carefully observing Emily, without interfering unnecessarily. The girl didn't throw tantrums, didn't raise her voice, didn't show resistance. She was everything that many adults would call an exemplary child. To an outsider, there was absolutely nothing wrong with her, but small gestures began to catch Sophia's attention. Emily would apologize when she dropped a pencil. She would stop playing as soon as she noticed an adult entering the room. She would look at her parents before smiling, as if seeking permission even to feel joy. Every movement seemed to pass through an invisible filter of approval. When she made a mistake, Emily would walk away by herself. She would sit in silence, head down, as if she were serving a punishment that no one had verbally administered. No one ordered her around, no one scolded her, no one yelled at her. Yet the girl seemed to know exactly when she didn't deserve attention. At night, Michael watched the recordings and felt a strange sense of relief. Nothing out of place, no worrying behavior. The cameras confirmed what he believed. His daughter was calm, easygoing, predictable. The system worked. Sophia, however, saw something that no lens could interpret. She saw a child who confused love with approval, affection with performance, presence with success. Emily didn't feel loved for who she was, but for how well she fit in. She didn't live in fear of making mistakes. She lived in fear of not being worthy of love. On a quiet afternoon, Sophia sat on the living room floor without calling Emily, without suggesting games, without proposing activities. She simply remained there, present, occupying the space peacefully. Emily watched from afar, uneasy, as if she were facing something unexpected and potentially dangerous. The girl approached slowly, stopping a few steps away. Her eyes analyzed Sophia's every gesture, searching for signs of correction or disapproval. Nothing happened. Silence remained. "You don't have to do anything to stay here," Sophia said softly, breaking the tension without imposing anything. Emily frowned, confused. After a few seconds, she asked in a low voice, almost as a secret, "Even if I make a mistake?" The question hit Sophia hard. It wasn't something a 6-year-old should be carrying. She took a deep breath before answering, aware of the weight of that moment. "Even if I make a mistake," he said, firmly but kindly. Emily remained silent. Her eyes filled with tears, which she quickly wiped away, as if erasing something forbidden. Then she sat down beside Sophia, still keeping a small space between them. It was there that Sophia understood everything. That house taught, without words, that love was conditional on getting it right. That night, the cameras recorded something different. Emily tripped in the living room and fell. She lay on the floor for a few seconds, motionless, without crying. She looked around as if calculating the impact of that mistake, as if deciding whether she deserved help or not. Sophia appeared in the frame, knelt beside her, and did something that had never been allowed in that house. She opened her arms. She said nothing. She didn't correct anyone. She simply offered her presence without demands. Emily hesitated for a few seconds that seemed like an eternity. Then she threw herself into that embrace, as if catching her breath after being submerged for too long. Her body trembled, not from physical pain, but from something that had been held back for too long. Michael watched the scene in the office, feeling a discomfort that was difficult to explain. Victoria, beside him, put her hand to her chest, her eyes welling with tears. "She never does that to me," she murmured, more to herself than to him. Michael's attempt to connect was clumsy. He found Emily in her room trying to assemble a complex jigsaw puzzle. Michael sat beside her, picked up a piece, and tried to force it into the wrong place. Emily shrugged, expecting a scolding for her failure. Instead, Michael sighed, took the piece, and set it aside. "I guess I don't know how to do this," he admitted, his voice hoarse. It was the first time Emily had heard him admit a mistake. Victoria, for her part, attempted a gesture of affection. She brought a cake she had bought, not baked, and placed it on the table. "It's your favorite," she said, without her usual forced smile. Emily looked at the cake, then at her mother, and the difficulty of accepting unconditional affection was visible. The silence in the house was now one of learning. It was no longer the silence of perfection, but the cautious silence of someone dismantling an old structure, piece by piece, to build something more human and true. Michael and Victoria were learning to love without managing, and Emily, to exist without fear. The road would be long, but the first crack in the armor of perfection had been made. Later, still embracing Sophia, Emily whispered something that no one expected to hear. "I try to be good, ... so you won't leave." At that moment, all the cameras in the house lost their meaning. The real problem was never the child's behavior. It was the silent fear of not being worthy of love. The morning after the hug captured on camera, the house awoke to a different kind of silence. It wasn't the rigid silence of before, but a silence laden with something new, almost uncomfortable. Michael came downstairs earlier than usual, still trying to organize thoughts that insisted on escaping his rational logic. For the first time, he didn't just walk through the living room, observing whether everything was in order. He stopped, took a deep breath, and remained there, present. Emily was sitting at the kitchen table, drawing with excessive care, as if every stroke needed to be perfect. When she dropped a pencil on the floor, her body reacted automatically, stiffening, and her mouth opened to apologize before anyone could say anything. Michael saw it happen before his eyes, without cameras, without screens mediating the scene. And, in that instant, something began to break inside him. "Everything's fine," he said, his voice lower than usual, as he picked up the pencil from the floor. Emily looked at him suspiciously, as if she expected a correction that didn't come. Her eyes didn't fill with tears, but there was a deep confusion, as if the world had changed its rules without warning. Michael felt a pang in his chest when he realized that that simple phrase was something far too rare in his daughter's routine. Victoria watched everything from afar, leaning against the kitchen counter, feeling a discomfort difficult to name. She had always believed she was doing her best, offering structure, stability, and opportunities. She had never raised her voice, never been aggressive, never considered herself a cold mother. Yet, seeing her daughter's reaction to a simple gesture of acceptance, she began to wonder how many times she had confused demandingness with care. Sophia entered the kitchen at that moment, immediately sensing the tension in the air. She said nothing, only greeted Emily with a discreet smile and approached her. The girl looked up at the au pair as if seeking confirmation that her parents' new behavior wasn't just a passing phase. Sophia simply nodded slightly, offering reassurance without interfering. Michael then realized something he had never considered before. He had spent years observing his daughter through cameras, reports, and outside interpretations, but he had never stopped to observe her without trying to correct anything. For the first time, he felt ashamed to realize that he knew the market charts better than his own daughter's silent fears. As the days passed, small changes began to occur in the house, almost imperceptible to those who weren't paying attention. Emily began to move with less rigidity, although she still carried fear on her shoulders, like a difficult habit to break. Sometimes she allowed herself to laugh, but she would immediately look around, as if checking if it was acceptable. Each advance was followed by a retreat, like someone testing unstable ground. The cameras remained on, but now they served a different purpose. Michael no longer consulted them merely for flaws. He watched them, trying to understand what he had previously ignored. He noticed how many times his daughter interrupted a game upon hearing footsteps in the hallway. How many times she adjusted her own behavior when she felt she was being watched. The images, once reassuring, were now disturbing. Victoria began to get closer to her daughter, still with excessive caution, as if afraid of doing something wrong. She sat beside her while she drew, but avoided correcting, avoided guiding, avoided interfering. It was difficult for someone accustomed to controlling processes to accept that the hardest thing, at that moment, was simply being present. Still, she tried, even feeling guilty for everything she was beginning to see. Sophia remained a quiet and steadfast presence, without placing herself at the center of decisions. When Emily made a mistake, she didn't react with exaggerated enthusiasm or disappointment. She simply stayed. And, for the girl, this began to mean something powerful. Making a mistake didn't result in estrangement. There was no loss. There was continuity. On a quiet afternoon, Emily drew something different from usual. It wasn't perfect lines or organized shapes. It was loose strokes, mixed colors, and a small figure in the center of the page. When Michael approached and asked what it was, the girl carefully replied, "It's me, ... when I can breathe." The sentence hung in the air, too heavy to ignore. Michael felt his eyes burn, but he didn't look away. For the first time, he understood that there was nothing wrong with his daughter. What needed to change wasn't her behavior, but the environment that had taught her to disappear in order to be loved. As the days passed, small changes began to occur in the house, almost imperceptible to those who weren't paying attention. Emily began to move with less rigidity, although she still carried fear on her shoulders, like a difficult habit to break. Sometimes she allowed herself to laugh, but she would immediately look around, as if checking if it was acceptable. Each advance was followed by a retreat, like someone testing unstable ground. Victoria felt like an architect who suddenly realizes the foundation of her masterpiece is rotten. The perfection she so prized was a comfortable lie. Emily's pain, revealed in that embrace with Sophia, was proof that her conditional love had failed. She began spending her nights in the library, not reading contracts, but books on child development and attachment. She didn't know how to get closer to Emily. Her body, trained for impeccable posture and professional detachment, didn't know how to relax. One night, she found Emily asleep on the sofa, a coloring book in her lap. Victoria sat in the nearby armchair, watching. She didn't wake her, didn't cover her, just stayed there, present, fighting the urge to pick up the book that had fallen on the floor. She realized that the biggest obstacle wasn't Emily, but herself. In a rare moment of vulnerability, Victoria sought out Michael in his office. He was looking at the monitor, but not at the cameras. He was reading an article about perfect child syndrome. "I failed," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Michael turned, and for the first time they saw each other not as business partners, but as two lost parents. "We failed," he corrected, extending his hand. The touch wasn't passionate, but a silent pact that from that moment on, they would learn together. The change would be slow, painful, but necessary. Victoria began leaving little notes for Emily, not about chores, but about things she liked. "I loved your drawing today," or "Thank you for making me laugh." They were small gestures, but they dismantled years of silence. Michael, the master of control, was learning to embrace incompetence. He tried to help Emily with a school project about the solar system. He, who managed fortunes, couldn't make a cardboard ring of Saturn without tearing it. Emily watched tense, expecting the explosion of frustration to come. But Michael just laughed, a sound that seemed strange in his throat. "Well, it seems Dad's better at building buildings than planets," he admitted, with a smile. Emily laughed back, a genuine, loud laugh, the first Michael had heard from her in years. That moment of shared failure was worth more than any progress report. He began turning off the cameras one by one. Not all at once, but gradually, like someone switching off life support machines that are no longer needed. With each camera turned off, he felt a mixture of fear and relief. The fear of losing control, the relief of finally trusting. He realized that true protection didn't come from surveillance, but from connection. He began telling Emily bedtime stories, inventing plots where the heroes could make mistakes and still be loved. He was rewriting the script of his daughter's life, and, in the process, rewriting his own. Sophia watched the transformation with the quiet satisfaction of someone who plants a seed and sees the first flower bloom. She never saw herself as a savior, only as a translator. She translated Emily's fear for her parents and unconditional love for the girl. Her presence had been the catalyst, the mirror that forced Michael and Victoria to see the truth. One morning, Sophia requested a meeting with Michael and Victoria. The atmosphere was no longer that of a job interview, but one of mutual respect. She explained that it was time to leave. Victoria, for the first time, cried openly. "But what if we go back to what we were?" she asked, her fear visible. Sophia smiled. "You can't go back. You saw it. And love, when it's real, is never forgotten. Emily doesn't need me to be herself anymore. She needs you to be yourselves, without fear of making mistakes." The farewell was simple, but full of emotion. Emily gave Sophia a drawing, not of perfect lines, but of a large, yellow sun, with two figures holding hands. Months passed. The mansion on the hill was still immaculate, but the silence had changed. Now, it was a silence that could be broken at any moment by a loud laugh, a shout of "Gotcha," or the sound of Victoria playing the piano imperfectly but joyfully. Michael now came home earlier, and his office was being transformed into an art studio for Emily. He still managed his company with the same strategic coldness, but he had learned to separate work from life. One afternoon, Emily and Michael were in the living room, building a Lego castle. The castle collapsed. Emily didn't flinch. She looked at her parents, who were sitting on the floor with her, and said, "Again." Victoria, who was reading a book on the sofa, smiled. "Again. And this time, let's try a leaning tower," she replied. Fear had been replaced by curiosity, perfection by humanity. Michael picked up his cell phone, not to check the camera alert, but to take a picture of the crumbling castle. He looked at the screen, then at his daughter, and realized that the most perfect image he had ever captured was not of an organized house, but of a disorganized, yet finally connected family. The surveillance system had been completely deactivated. The only monitoring that mattered now was the attentive and loving gaze they exchanged. The script for that family was finally being written with the ink of freedom. The script for that family, once written in lines of perfection and control, was now a work in progress, full of smudges, corrections, and above all, authenticity. Michael and Victoria, by allowing themselves imperfection, had finally found true richness, the freedom to love unconditionally. The house, once a monument to discipline, became a home, a space where mistakes were merely an invitation to try again, and silence, a pause between laughs. Little Emily, who once cowered in fear of existing, now occupied the space with the confidence of someone who knows she is loved, not for what she does, but for who she is. And so, the Reynolds story continued. No longer under the cold surveillance of cameras, but under the warmth of mutual acceptance.